So what we're looking at today is an overview of the book of Revelation. When studying any book of the Bible, it is good to understand the basis upon which it was written, whom it was written to, the approximate date and time, what are the major themes within the book. And that's what I want us to look at today. So I'm going to share my screen. And let's jump right in. Revelation chapter 1 and verse 1 says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants things which must shortly take place. And he sent and signified it by his angel to his servant John. The book of Revelation, the scripture says, the book says of itself, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. Revelation means something that is revealed. So it's not hidden or mysterious as some would have us to think. And so if you can see on the right side here, it says disclosure, unveiling, something revealed. So that's something that we need to remember, that it's a book that was revealed. It says God gave it to him. Notice the line of possession or transmission rather, to show his servants things which must shortly take place. The servants would be you and I and those who are alive at the time. He sent and signified it by his angel. So from the Father to the Son, to the angel, to John. What this also tells us is that John, or someone named John, is the author of the book. That's important to understand. And then the question comes, which John were they talking about? I suggest that it's John, the gospel writer, the one who leaned on Jesus' breast, or as he describes himself, his love. There were 12 disciples, but Jesus chose 3 who were his closest associates, Peter, James, and John. And it is that John, we believe, who wrote the book of Revelation as well as the Gospel of John. Now, let's look at something else. When was it written and to whom it was written? I'm using the Lexham Bible Dictionary. It says the author of Revelation identifies himself as John, a servant of God and spiritual brother to the members of the 7 churches. We find reference to that. I just read you verse 1. Verse 4, John to the 7 churches. Look at verse 9. I, John, both your brother and companion, the tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was on the isle that is called Patmos. 22 and verse 8. Now I, John, saw and heard these things. So the book itself testifies as to who wrote it. The author lists himself as John. What else can we learn? Why was he there on the Isle of Patmos? Let's go back a little. Verse 9 says, he describes himself as their brother and companion in the tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was on the isle that is called Patmos. And so the question is, why was he there? Patmos is a place in the Aegean Sea, somewhere near modern-day Turkey. And let me see if I can pull up something for you. Okay, here we go. This is what, let me join the call so I can make sure that we're seeing the same thing. Just bear with me. Okay, here we go. Now, okay, this is modern day Patmos. As you can see, it's quite developed. But when John was there, it was basically a rocky, mountainous outpost where he was there by himself. So we understand he was on the island called Patmos, the isles called Patmos. And according to the church fathers are those individuals who live within the first 200 to 300 years or so after the death of the, let's say, John, the last apostle, Irenaeus, Eusebius, and Jerome. John is the author of Revelation there and was exiled there by the Emperor Domitian and released to Ephesus under Nerva in 96 AD. So John would have written Revelation, is believed, somewhere around AD 95. That's just a general timeline since we don't have anything more specific than that. So we understand who the author is. Then why was he there when he wrote this book? The Lexham Bible Dictionary says that likely his presence on Patmos was not for the purpose of proclaiming the word of God, but rather he had been exiled there as punishment by the state for preaching. So he was not there to preach to no converts, to bring in converts, anything. Probably was banished there, they're saying, because he was preaching the good news of salvation. And that is serious. Let's look at something else. There are those, of course, who dispute that he actually did it, but as we see, internal evidence suggests it. This dictionary says between AD 68 and 69, or that's one possibility, following the reign of Emperor Nero, or around 95 during the reign of Emperor Domitian. And it says the latter date, AD 95, has the support of Irenaeus, Eusebius, and of course, the debate continues. So let's look at something else now. So we have this information there. Who was the audience? And it says 7 churches of Asia Minor, which is present-day Western Turkey. So let's pull up and see what Turkey looks like, modern-day Turkey. So what we're looking at today is an overview. Here's modern-day Turkey. And let's see if I can bring some context to this. That's Europe over there. Syria, okay, here we are. Israel is down here. So assuming he was somewhere in this region preaching, they sent him all the way out here. I think this is it here. Paphos, if I'm not mistaken, in order to get rid of him, to silence him. Instead, God used it in order for him to write the book of Revelation. So I'm going to close this now. And these were the churches. And it has been observed that these churches, the order in which he wrote them to would be the order if someone was on horseback, which they would have used, or some type of vehicle, foot, whatever, and they would travel the road. And this would be the order of the churches as they were outlined. And when we talk about churches, we need to understand churches, you're talking about our equivalent of a small group. where you met in someone's home, maybe 10, 15 of you, and that's where you had church, so to speak. So don't think of anything like what we have right now. And that's what this one here is saying. Now, I want to look at something else. Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary. Apocalypsis, lips, means a disclosure, unveiling, something revealed. And they say in religious literature, the term refers to the unveiling of the future, especially the medium of symbolic prophecy. And as I always point out to individuals, when you think of the book of Daniel, that's apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature deals with dreams and visions where the author sees something into the future. That's what apocalyptic literature is all about. There were other stuff that were considered apocalyptic, which didn't make it into our Bible. First Enoch, the Sibylline oracles, and say the Western Church accepted revelation of scripture from very first centuries. Very first, for centuries, the churches in Egypt, Palestine, and Syria rejected its claim to a place in the sacred canon. Not until the close of the 4th century, which would be about 300, ending of 300 AD, that the last book of the New Testament as we know it today was generally accepted in the East. And they have some more information here that you might be interested in. And Gregory of Nazianzus, who died in AD 389, published a list of New Testament books omitting Revelation, as did Cyrus of Jerusalem, who died in 386. Athanasius, Bishop Athanasius, in around 367, he wrote a letter to the churches he was in charge of, saying these 27 books are what you are to use in your scriptures. Forget about all of the other books that were written around that time. The Old Testament was pretty much settled. But the New Testament, which book should be used? What about the letter of Peter to Paul? What about the Shepherd of Hermas? What about the Didache? He's saying, hey, use these 27. And it is said that the rule that was used, it had to be written by an apostle or someone closely related to an apostle. So you have Luke and Acts got in because Luke was a traveling companion of Paul. It is believed that Hebrews is written by Paul, and that's how Hebrews got in. And then because Paul said that he was called on the road to Damascus, that's how come his books got in as a part of the canon. Now I want to move on to something else. Here's another one, this time Andrews Study Bible Notes from Study Bible Notes coming out of Andrews University. Again, they also identify John as the author of Revelation, somewhere off the coast of Asia Minor, probably modern day Turkey. And the scripture is not specific as to which John it was because there was more than one John. But we look at the church fathers and church history, we call it sacred history, where they identify him as the same John of the Gospels, the brother of James, son of Zebedee, a disciple of Jesus. And there are parallels between Revelation and John. Again, they look at the historical date and place of writing. It would have been on the Isle of Patmos, more than likely. And we know it was written to 7 churches. There were more than 7 churches, but for whatever reason, these 7 churches were chosen. And it was a rough circle about 50 miles across Western Turkey. And they were listed in Revelation in clockwise order, beginning with Ephesus in the southwest. So let's see if I can. Okay, here we go. So here we have Ephesus here. This is John here on the Isle of Patmos. This here, the white section is water, the Aegean Sea. And so someone would have taken a boat or whatever to go here and have taken the letter, read it in Ephesus. Then after it was read in Ephesus, it'd go on to Smyrna. Depending on how much time they had, they would have tried to make a copy of it. And this was done by hand. Then on to Pergamum, then on to Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and then Laodicea. And as the other one said, it was written around AD 95 or 95 years after the birth of Christ, during the close of the reign of Emperor Domitian. And it says, during this emperor's reign, the Christians began to suffer persecution. And so during a time of persecution, God gave John this letter to give to the churches to encourage them. But as we can see, the letter has benefit for us because it reveals events far beyond their time. And that's what we're looking at here. And it serves as a source of encouragement for people even today. Now I want to show you something else. We're going to spend some time in here. So here we go. An overview of the structure and content of the book of Revelation. And this is being taken from the book Symposium on Revelation, Introductory and Exegetical Studies. You can purchase it in hardback or online, either one. So here's an overview of the structure and content of the apocalypse. I want you to take note here. It says the historical era visions. Then you have the eschatological judgment era visions, which mean end time visions. So let's look. Revelation is designed in a particular way. We have a victorious introductory scene or scene with temple setting. And you're going to see that as you go across. Each major vision began with a scene in heaven of the temple. So when we look at chapter 1, verse 10 to 20, where John was in the spirit, he heard a voice like a trumpet. Says he turned to see the voice that spoke with him, where he saw the 7 lampstands, the Son of Man clothed with a garment down to the feet, girded about the chest with a golden girdle. He was dressed like a priest. John had never seen Christ this way before. That's one of the things you would realize. After the vision of the temple setting or a victorious introductory scene, then you have a basic prophetic description in history. That's something else that you would pay attention to. Okay, make sure your mics are muted, please. And you have chapters 2 and 3, which deals with the message to the 7 churches. So basic prophetic description in history, what's happening historically or either in the past or in the future. And this was the first vision. Notice something when we come to the seventh vision. After this, you have an interlude, a pause. Those of you who used to go to the movie theater or who still go, I don't know what happens now, but as a child, we would go to the theater and in the middle of the movie, they would pause it. So you could go to the concession stand and buy your popcorn, your soft drinks, your chips, your hot dogs, whatever. That's the interlude. Then it was followed by the second half of the movie. And in this case here, we're talking about spotlight on last day events. So first, there's a temple scene. Then there's a prophetic description in history. Then we have a spotlight on last day events. Then we have the end time culmination, eschatological culmination, climax to history. And here we have it here. Notice again, look at the pattern you will see. It's the same thing right across the board. And notice this here. Dr. Strand says, in closing, one further item may be briefly introduced here. He says it is noteworthy that in the introductory scenes of the 8 visions, the temple imagery reveals a pattern of first an earthly venue in vision 1, the candlestick that represents the churches on earth, followed by a heavenly venue in visions 2 through 7, either an explicit or direct mention of the temple in heaven or its furniture or a background that indicates this heavenly setting. And then it is followed by return again to an earthly venue in vision 8. So let's look at vision 8. With temple setting, and when we look at it, this really deals with Christ speaking. He says, behold, I make all things new. You may need to slide the picture on the side if it's in the way. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things. I will be his God, and he shall be my son. And then it goes on to talk with the cowardly, etc., etc., etc. So you're going to see that 1 and 8. Notice the similarities. A, B, A, B. There's no C and D in vision 1. There's no C and D in vision 8. They correspond. This is the beginning, the prelude. This would be, what's the other word? It slipped me just like that. But there's some similarities between these two here. You will notice this is what we call a chiastic structure, where the first and the last are the same. He goes on to help us see it a little further. That's not the one I'm looking for. If you're interested in this here where he explains it, you can send me a WhatsApp and I will email the document to you. Email the section of it, not the entire book. So look at what's happening here. Vision 3, vision 4, and he does a summary here. And some say this is the center of the book of Revelation. This is where a major shift takes place, because in chapter 11 and verse 19, John sees God's temple in heaven open with the ark of God's testament or covenant in view. There are flashes of lightning, voices, peals of thunder, and earthquake and heavenly hail. Because when you go to the very next verse, which is chapter 12 and verse 1, he talks about the persecution of the woman, which was largely futuristic in his day. Some of the visions were both present as well as futuristic. But when we look at chapter 12 and onward, it is basically futuristic. So one is historical, the other is futuristic, the visions. One half of the book deals largely with the historical stuff. Historical, and the visions also overlap each other many times. What was said in one was repeated in the other. So for example, this thing is getting on my nerves. Watch it beeping. The 7 churches cover the same periods as the 7 trumpets, as well as the 7 churches, the 7 trumpets, and then we have I don't have this written down, so it's just running from me. You have the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3. Okay, then the 7 seals, and then the 7 trumpets. And then he talks about the respective prophetic sequences. He talks about the temple imagery and its significance. As I said, we find it throughout. Positive and negative elements in the introductory visions. Okay, here it is. Notice this. The 7 trumpets, aggression by the evil forces, chapters 1 to 5, then you have 6 and 7. Exodus from Egypt motive, fall of Babylon motive. 7 bowl plagues, judgment on the evil forces. Notice a similarity, 1 and 1, 7 trumpets, 7 bowl plagues. You have trumpets being sounded and plagues being poured out, judgment being poured out. Aggression by evil forces, the fall of Babylon motive. And this covers from 8 and 2 all the way to 14 and 20. Revelation 14, 6 through 12 talks about the fall of Babylon. Then there's the Exodus from Egypt motive, and there's the fall of Babylon motive. So here we see the aggression by the evil forces. We see judgment on the evil forces. Here, the 7 trumpets, the judgments are partial. Here, the 7 bowls or the 7 plagues, the judgment is complete. And he goes on to explain some of this here. We won't cover all of it. Something else I want to show you, another chart. 2 envelope structures in the introductory scenes in the book of Revelation. Earthly venue, you have 1 and 8, which I pointed out earlier. Then you have the heavenly venue, 2 to 4 and 5 to 7. Earthly and heavenly venues. Notice how the arrangement of the book. And this also helped them to remember they were aware of these literary structures, and so they would have picked up on it. Thoroughly positive thrust, predominantly positive thrust, both positive and negative emphasis. You have 1 and 2, you have 7 and 8. You have 3 and 4, you have 5 and 6. Let's look further. Let's see, there's another one. Just need to find that last one for you. I did not bookmark it, so bear with me. Let me see if I can find it by scrolling. I will encourage you to get, it's a set you have to purchase. If you get it in digital format, Logos Bible Software sell it. It costs about $50. If you get it in print, I think it costs a little more, from the Geoscience Research Institute of the General Conference. Okay. Let me, not where I want to take you, so let's try something. Okay, it'll come back to me. I didn't remember to bookmark it to find out exactly where it is. I'd have to go through my other documents. But as you can see, some of the general information about the book of Revelation, that was a quick overview. So when you read it, if you have that chart in front of you, if you have access to it, it helps you to see the symmetry. And that is a feature of Bible passages, whereby there's symmetry. What is at the beginning is also at the ending. If you look at the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis deals with history. Deuteronomy also deals with history. Deuteronomy recounts the history of the Israelites. Genesis largely covers the history of the Israelites. Exodus deals with the numbering of the people there leaving Egypt. Numbers also deals with numbering of the people. Leviticus is in the center, which deals largely with the priestly code in the Pentateuch. So that is more or less the center of it. And someone has said that the Day of Atonement is actually the center of the book of Leviticus, not so much by chapters, because remember, chapters and verses were added way down the line, about 13 or so, 1400 years after the death of Christ. That's a general timeline as to when it was added. But for Israelites, they understood this literary structure, this chiasm, and they would have been aware of it. They would look for it when they read it. And so that's where it begins to make sense, and it takes on a different meaning when you can trace it. Let's see. Look at this one here. Revelation 1:12-20, the earth focus on the earthly work of Christ combined with holy place imagery. Chapters 4 and 5, inauguration of heavenly sanctuary. Thorough mix of sanctuary image, but holy place is the focus. 8:3-5, intercession in the heavenly sanctuary or the holy place. 11 and 19, judgment in heavenly sanctuary, the most holy place. Why do we say that? Look at it. The temple of God was open in heaven and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple. That's the most holy place. And that's why they say this is the center of the book of Revelation. 15:5-8, cessation of heavenly sanctuary ministry. Let's look at it. Says the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was open, and out of the temple came the 7 angels having the 7 plagues. And so if the 7 plagues are being poured out, the 7 plagues are poured out on the inhabitants of the earth, they experience the full fury of God's wrath. Verse 8 says the temple was filled, Revelation 15:8, the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one was able to enter the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed. And if I remember correctly, yes, the angels get, look at verse 7. Let me pull this up. Here we go. The temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was open, and out of the temple came the 7 angels. Notice where they came from. Within the most holy place, having the 7 plagues. Then one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, and the temple was filled with smoke. For me, it seems as if the angels received their bowls from the same place where God was. In other words, judgment and justice flow from the same place. Let me go back. Okay, here we go. Okay, pay attention to verse 5. The temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened, and out of the temple, this is in the most holy place, temple came the 7 angels having the 7 plagues, the place where one would go to find mercy and grace, etc., is the place where judgment also comes from. Let's go back to, here we go. So 19:1-10, doxology in heaven, with the absence of explicit heavenly sanctuary imagery, but it's still taking place in heaven. And then vision 7 from chapter 21 and verse 1-22 and 5, back to earth, because the tabernacle of God is now with man. So that's another way of looking at the organization of the book of Revelation. And I'm going to stop here. Do you have questions or comments at this point? I'll stop sharing the screen for a while.
I just came in and I wanted to know what the rundown was.
Repeat for me. I didn't hear you, Jojo. My volume was turned down a bit. Repeat for me.
No, I said that I just came and I was wondering what was this all about. That's all.
Okay, we're looking at an overview of the book of Revelation. I will send you the video. I'll put it so that you can watch it, rewatch it on YouTube where we're streaming. So that's, like I said, a general overview of the book of Revelation that you can get an idea. So now when you read, I want you to bear in mind that imagery. Some of you may want to save it, so I'll put it in the chat. You can go back to the Anglican YouTube page and find it there. Overview of the book of Revelation. Save that and bookmark it if you need to. So it helps you to understand what's happening and see how the different saints fit together, that they're not random visions just thrown about, but rather it's a sequence. It's something that is well organized. And you see where the church is militant in the first half of the book. The second half, the church is triumphant. The first half, she is largely being persecuted and fighting the devil, the beast, the false prophet, etc., etc. But in the second half, you see God pouring out punishment on the wicked, and the church is now triumphant because the wicked are now being punished. And so read Revelation with that context or that frame in mind when you read it, and it will begin opening up windows for you as you read it. And remember that a lot of it is Revelation's book written using symbols. It's symbolic. So you have to look and say, what do these symbols mean? And the best way to find it is look and see how John and Revelation interpret the symbols. Look at Daniel, which covers the same period, but in a much broader sense. John focuses really on the time of the Christian church. Daniel focuses on from the time of the Babylonians right down to the end of time. So Daniel paints with a very broad brush. John narrows in the focus to the time that of the Christians who would live from his time right on down to the end of time. Something I also would like to show you. Let's see how we can come out of. Okay, here we go. One more thing I want to share with you. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, here we go. Now, I'm trusting you've already turned your phone sideways. So let me give you an overview again of Revelation. This one is coming from the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary. This is an outline. So here you have a prologue. And then you will notice it is 1. Then you have the letters to the 7 churches, the throne of God and the book with 7 seals. And that's from 1, chapter 4 to chapter 8. You will see a 6th seal. Notice, for example, at the ending of the 6th seal, the question is asking, the great day of God's wrath has come. Who shall be able to stand? And this is an interlude because chapter 7, verse 1 to 8 answers the question that was asked in chapter 6. Verse 17, the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? That question is answered in chapter 7, the 144,000. Then we come the sealing of the 144,000. Then we hear about the great multitude. And that's why I believe, even though it emphasizes this 144,000, I don't believe that this number is literal, but rather symbolic, because right afterward, John sees a great multitude which no one could number. Then after that, remember this is the 6th seal, then you have the 7th seal is open, where the controversy is ended. 8 and verse 1 says, silence in heaven for about half an hour. And the trumpets begin afterwards with the judgments of God. But notice again, before the trumpets are blown with the judgments of God, what happens? There's a vision of heaven. So then you have the judgments are now being poured out. And you have the first 6 trumpets. And like I said, this covers the same period as the seals, as well as the churches. By the way, John was simply moving the seals. He still at that point had not told us what was on the seal. On the scroll. Notice now, where you have 5, the great controversy. This shows the church is now under attack. The church is still under attack in chapter 12. Satan makes war upon the remnant people. And then you have all of these subcategories here. B, issues involved in the last conflict. And you have it here. Then we have the 7 last plagues, divine judgments upon the wicked. At this section here, we look more at these visions relate to the future. The 7 last plagues have not started as yet. The raiment of Babylon the Great and her fall have not taken place as yet. Extermination of evil. The new earth and its inhabitants. All of these are events that happen in the future. And so that's why we say Revelation is split into the historical and then the prophetic or the future. That's the way it is organized. So you can unmute your mic or you can type in the chat. Those who may be on YouTube, you can also utilize the chat if you so desire to ask your question, make your comment. Okay, I don't see any hands or anyone. So I trust that means that the lesson was clear enough for you to follow along. So we'll meet again Sunday coming, same time, same Zoom ID and password. It remains the same each week, and we will continue this. So share with someone who you think might be interested in it, and I will continue in the book of Revelation for next week.
Pastor, I just want to say it was a very good study. Thank you so much for your enlightenment and your words of encouragement.
Okay, glad to be of help. So with that, I'll close with prayer. Kind Father in heaven, thank you so much for everything you have done. Thank you for the enlightenment of your word, which helps us to understand that you love us, you care for us, and that is why you gave us the book of Revelation, that we will find comfort and hope in an evil world that seems controlled by Satan. We have the comfort and hope to know that God is still here and he's working things out for the benefit of his people. Help us to study and to understand, open our dark understandings, that we may see that which was given to us, that we may grow. Bless us this evening, I pray in Jesus' name. So see you again next week, Lord's will.